knew something was wrong the moment I walked into my own birthday party, and nobody said my name. It was Saturday evening, mid-May, the kind of spring night when people linger instead of rushing home. The restaurant was full. The private room lights were already dimmed, and there were more people inside than I'd seen in one place since my grandmother's funeral. Aunts, cousins, family friends I barely recognized anymore. At least 50 faces turned toward me at once. No one smiled, no one clapped, no one said, "Happy birthday." I stood there with my purse still on my shoulder, waiting for the moment to catch up with the room. It didn't. The silence held heavy and deliberate, like everyone was waiting for a signal I hadn't been given. At the far end of the table, my younger sister Natalie sat upright in her chair, hands folded neatly in front of her. In front of her was a cream-colored envelope, thicker than a greeting card, sealed and centered like a place setting. She met my eyes and smiled, small and confident. Not warm, certain. That's when I understood this wasn't a party. It was a setup. I turned 30 that day. I hadn't expected much. My family wasn't sentimental. Birthdays were acknowledged, not celebrated. A phone call, a card signed in a rush, maybe dinner if someone remembered to make a reservation. When Natalie insisted on planning something big this year, I assumed she was trying to be generous in her own way. Now I saw it for what it was. Our parents sat beside her, stiff and quiet. My mother's hands were clasped so tightly, her knuckles had gone pale. My father avoided my eyes altogether, staring at the table like he was bracing for impact. Around them, the rest of the room felt arranged, not gathered. Chairs angled inward, bodies leaning forward. A room full of witnesses. I took a few steps inside the door, closing softly behind me. No music, no cake, just that envelope waiting. Natalie finally spoke, her voice light, almost cheerful. She said something about how everyone was here because family matters, how this was a special night, how honesty was important. The words washed over me without landing. I was still trying to understand why my birthday felt like an ambush. I've always been the stable one, the dependable one. I live alone, I pay my bills, I don't ask for help. I thought that meant I was safe from scenes like this. I was wrong. As I moved closer to the table, I noticed the seating. One chair stood slightly apart from the rest, facing inward. Empty, waiting. The only open spot in the room. Natalie glanced at it, then back at me. "Sit," she said gently. I didn't sit yet. I scanned the faces again, searching for someone, anyone who looked confused, uncomfortable, sympathetic. I didn't find it. Whatever was about to happen, they already knew, or they had agreed not to stop it. The envelope remained unopened, untouched, heavy with whatever truth Natalie believed she owned. In that moment, before a single word of explanation, I understood one thing with painful clarity. Everyone in that room knew why they were there. I was the only one who didn't. And whatever was inside that envelope, it wasn't meant to celebrate me. As I stood there still holding my purse, a strange calm settled over me, not peace, but recognition. I had seen this before. Not like this, not so openly. But the shape of it was familiar. Families have patterns. You don't always notice them when you're young because you grow up inside them. They feel like weather, normal. I didn't realize how consistent mine had been until that room forced me to look backward all at once. Birthdays were the easiest place to start. Natalie's were events, reservations made weeks in advance, group photos, speeches about how special she was, how proud everyone felt watching her grow into herself. Mine were quieter, a text if someone remembered, a dinner that ended early because my father had work the next morning. Once when I turned 25, my mother handed me a card already signed by everyone else, like I'd been an afterthought added at the end of the list. I told myself it didn't matter. I was an adult. Adults didn't need attention. Adults handled their own feelings. Natalie needed things. She needed reassurance, space, forgiveness. If she changed her mind about a job or a relationship or a plan, it was framed as finding herself. If I did the same, it was instability, worry, a problem to be corrected. By my late 20s, the roles were set. Natalie was the one everyone watched. I was the one everyone relied on. I worked full-time, paid my own rent, handled my life quietly. When my parents needed help, I was the one they called. When something broke, when paperwork needed sorting, when someone had to show up on short notice, I was dependable. That word followed me everywhere. Dependable people don't get celebrated. They get used. None of this felt dramatic at the time. That's the trick of long-standing imbalance. It doesn't announce itself as cruelty. It calls itself practicality. Standing in that room, I saw the pattern clearly for the first time. The seating, the silence, the way Natalie sat centered while I was being positioned literally and figuratively off to the side. This wasn't about a test or a result. It was about hierarchy. My mother used to say, "You're strong. You can handle it." It sounded like praise. I took it as such. Only later did I understand what it excused. Strong people don't get protected. They get pushed. I glanced again at the envelope on the table. It hadn't been handed to me. It wasn't addressed to me. It was placed like a prop meant to be revealed when the timing felt right to someone else. Around the room, people avoided my eyes. A few looked uncomfortable, but none looked surprised. That told me more than any speech could have. This moment had been prepared. Maybe not everyone knew the details, but they understood their role. Sight watch, don't interrupt. A memory surfaced then, uninvited. I was 16, sitting at the kitchen table after school, explaining that I wanted to apply to colleges out of state. Natalie had just announced she was quitting another activity she'd begged to join months earlier. My father turned to me and said, "Let's not rock the boat right now. Your sister's going through a lot." I'd nodded. I always nodded. That habit of yielding, of minimizing myself to keep things smooth, had trained everyone else in the room. They weren't being cruel in their minds. They were being consistent. I realized with a dull ache behind my ribs that this night wasn't an accident. It was an intention. The most public version yet of something I'd spent decades quietly enduring. Natalie tapped the envelope once with her finger, a small, deliberate sound that cut through the room. Whatever was inside it wasn't the beginning of the story. It was simply the first time they decided to say it out loud. The envelope didn't come out of nowhere. That was the part I couldn't stop thinking about. 3 days earlier, Wednesday afternoon, I was at my kitchen table sorting mail I hadn't had the energy to open after work. Bills, a credit card offer, a catalog I didn't remember requesting. My phone buzzed and Natalie's name lit up the screen. She didn't ask how I was. She never did. "I meant to tell you sooner," she said, breezy, like she was sharing gossip. But I figured it'd be more fun as a surprise about what I asked. There was a pause, not hesitation, timing. "I did one of those DNA kits," she said. "You know, the ancestry ones. I sent in samples for Mom and Dad too. It's kind of fascinating what you learn." I remember staring at the pile of envelopes in front of me, the way the late afternoon light cut across the table. "You sent in samples for them. They didn't mind," she said quickly. "Everyone's curious these days. It's just information." I waited for her to ask if I wanted to participate. She didn't. "What about me?" I said finally. Another pause, shorter this time. "Well, technically, the kit only needs a few samples to map things out. You'll still be included. It's family, right? Family." The word landed oddly, like it didn't quite fit the sentence. I told myself not to overreact. DNA tests were common now. People did them for fun, for curiosity, for background noise in their lives. Natalie loved anything that put her at the center of attention, anything she could turn into a story. Still, something about the way she'd said surprise stuck with me. Why bring it up now, I asked. Because the results came in, she said. I could hear the smile in her voice. And I thought your birthday would be a perfect time to share. Share how, I asked. With everyone, she said, like it was obvious. It's kind of a family thing. I didn't argue. That's another habit I've had my whole life, keeping my questions small so I don't seem difficult. I told myself it was harmless, that if there was nothing to hide, there was nothing to fear. But after we hung up, I sat there longer than I meant to, replaying the conversation, the way she'd framed it, the way she'd already decided when and how the information would be revealed. I realized then that I hadn't consented to anything. I hadn't signed a form. I hadn't sent in a sample. Whatever Natalie had in her hands, it hadn't come from me. That was the first real clue. Small, but solid. Something that could be checked later if I ever needed to. I thought about calling my parents, asking what they knew. I didn't. I'd spent years learning when questions were welcome and when they were treated like accusations. This felt like the latter. Instead, I told myself to wait, to observe, to keep track. Now, standing in that restaurant with the envelope sitting between Natalie and the rest of the family, the memory sharpened. The envelope wasn't addressed to me because it had never been meant for my participation. It was meant for my exposure. Natalie's fingers rested lightly on the table near it, possessive. She wasn't nervous. She was prepared. I noticed then that the envelope was sealed. No torn edge. No sign it had been opened and resealed. Whatever was inside was exactly as it had arrived. Untouched, unquestioned. Around us, people murmured softly, waiting. No one asked where the test came from. No one asked who had agreed to what. They trusted Natalie to tell the story. I felt a shift inside me, not anger yet, not resistance. Just awareness. The kind that clicks quietly into place. This wasn't about discovery, it was about control. About deciding who spoke, who listened, and who absorbed the fallout. I straightened my shoulders without thinking. I didn't know what the envelope contained. I didn't know what Natalie planned to say. But I knew one thing for certain. Whatever she was about to reveal, it wasn't a shared truth. It was a performance. The chair was closer than I realized. Natalie hadn't raised her voice. She didn't need to. The room itself seemed to lean toward that empty seat, drawing attention to it, shaping the moment without anyone saying another word. I felt it then, the quiet pressure of being expected to comply. I set my purse down slowly and took the seat. The table was longer than it needed to be, polished to a shine that reflected the overhead lights. Place settings lined both sides. Water glasses, already filled, napkins folded tight. Everything looked prepared, finished, as if this part of the evening had been rehearsed and the room itself knew its cues. I became aware of how I was positioned. Natalie sat at the head of the table, our parents flanking her. I was placed directly across from them, the distance deliberate, not among, opposite. It was the kind of arrangement you see in conference rooms or courtrooms, one side presenting, the other receiving. No one offered me a drink. No one asked if I'd eaten. Those small courtesies people extend without thinking were suddenly absent, and their absence felt pointed. Natalie clasped her hands together, resting them just behind the envelope. The seal caught the light unbroken. She glanced around the room, taking inventory, waiting until everyone was focused. I watched the faces instead. My mother's gaze drifted toward the far wall, her jaw tight. My father sat rigid, shoulders squared, eyes fixed straight ahead. He looked older than I remembered, tired, like a man who'd agreed to something he didn't know how to stop. Around them, the rest of the family settled into stillness. Chairs scraped softly as people adjusted. Someone cleared their throat and then thought better of it. There was an unspoken understanding that this was not a moment for interruption. I thought of the phone call with Natalie 3 days earlier. The way she'd said with everyone, The way she'd decided the timing for me. Sitting there now, I understood what that meant. This wasn't just information, it was theater, and I was seated where the spotlight would fall. Natalie finally spoke again, her tone calm, almost practiced. She said she wanted to be transparent, that families should be honest with each other, that secrets only cause harm. Each word sounded reasonable on its own. Together they formed a frame I hadn't agreed to stand inside. I felt the urge to ask questions, to slow things down, to clarify what exactly was about to happen, but the weight of the room pressed against me. 50 people watching, waiting. Any interruption would mark me as defensive before anything had even been said. So I stayed quiet. That choice silence was familiar. I'd learned it early. Silence kept things from escalating. Silence made other people comfortable. Silence was how I survived gatherings like this without becoming the problem. Natalie slid the envelope an inch closer to herself. A subtle movement that didn't escape my notice. She hadn't opened it yet. She was letting the anticipation build, letting the room settle into expectation. I noticed then that someone near the back had taken out their phone. Not to record, at least not openly, but to hold ready. Others followed suit, screens, lighting briefly before being lowered again. Whatever was coming, people wanted proof they'd been there for it. The pressure intensified, not sharp, but steady, like being held underwater just long enough to feel your chest tighten. I focused on my breathing, on the coolness of the chair beneath my hands. On staying present, I reminded myself that nothing had happened yet. No words spoken, no claims made, only a room waiting to be told what to think. Natalie's eyes met mine for a brief second. There was no malice in them, just certainty. That was what unsettled me most. I realized then that whatever was about to be revealed wasn't designed to invite discussion or understanding. It was designed to land, to stick, to leave me responding instead of speaking. The room fell completely silent. Natalie reached for the envelope. Natalie opened the envelope with a slow, deliberate motion, like she wanted everyone to see that nothing was rushed. The paper inside slid out cleanly, crisp, official-looking. She held it up just long enough for the room to register what it was before she began to explain it in her own words. Not reading aloud, interpreting, framing. She said it was a DNA test. She said it confirmed things people had wondered about for years. She said it explained why I was different. The pauses between her sentences were as calculated as the words themselves, leaving space for the room to fill in meaning before she finished each thought. I felt my face grow warm, then cold. The kind of physical reaction you don't control. Around me, people leaned in. Someone gasped softly. Another person shook their head as if something long suspected had finally been proven. Natalie kept going. She talked about transparency, about how truth, even when uncomfortable, was better than pretending. She said she wasn't trying to hurt me, that this was about honesty, about clearing the air. No one stopped her. My parents sat, frozen, eyes forward. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. My father's hands rested flat on the table, unmoving. They didn't confirm or deny anything. Their silence did the work for them. I realized then that this wasn't just Natalie's plan. It had been allowed. The room reacted the way rooms do when someone is publicly singled out. Whispers spread in small waves, pity mixed with judgment. A few sympathetic looks appeared, but none lasted. Sympathy is uncomfortable when it asks something of you. Natalie glanced at me just once. There was expectation in her eyes. She was waiting for a reaction. Tears, denial, anger, anything she could point to as proof that she'd been right to do this publicly. I didn't give her that. Instead, something inside me went very still. It wasn't bravery. It wasn't strength. It was the quiet clarity that comes when you realize there is nothing left to protect. The image, the peace, The version of the family you hoped might still exist. It all slipped out of reach in that moment. I saw the stakes clearly for the first time. This wasn't about whether the test was accurate, or fair, or ethical. It was about what would happen next if I continued to play my role. If I stayed silent now, this version of the story would become permanent. It would follow me into every future gathering, every conversation I wasn't present for. It would define me as the person who'd been exposed and quietly accepted it. I thought of all the times I'd swallowed my questions, all the moments I'd chosen harmony over honesty. They had led here. Natalie finished speaking and folded the paper neatly, placing it back on the table like she was done with it. Like I was done with it. The room waited. I could feel it, the collective pause, the expectation that I would now apologize for existing, for disrupting the family narrative simply by being who I was. That was the moral break. Not an outburst. Not a confrontation. Just a line inside me that I knew I would not step back over. I took a breath. Not to speak yet, just to claim it. For the first time that night, I understood that staying quiet wouldn't make this end faster. It would only make it final. Whatever came next would cost me something. Relationships, comfort, the illusion of belonging. But letting this stand would cost me more. I looked at the folded paper on the table, then at the faces around it, and I decided I would not carry their conclusion for them. I stood up before Natalie could say anything else. The movement was small, but it shifted the room. Chairs creaked. Someone near the window straightened in their seat. Natalie's confidence flickered just enough for me to notice. "There's something I need to add," I said. My voice didn't shake. That surprised me. I hadn't planned a speech. I hadn't rehearsed lines in my head. I just knew that if I stayed seated, I would stay contained inside the story she'd written for me. Natalie smiled tightly. "This isn't really the time." "It is," I said gently. Not louder, just firmer. I turned slightly, angling my body away from the table and toward the back of the room. Most people followed my gaze automatically, confused at first. A few looked startled, like they'd just realized there was someone they hadn't noticed before. He stood near the far wall, half shadowed by a column. A man in his early 60s, neatly dressed, posture straight but unassuming. He hadn't touched the food, he hadn't spoken, he hadn't drawn attention to himself until now. "This is Daniel Mercer," I said. "He's here at my invitation." A ripple moved through the room. My father's head snapped up. My mother's breath caught audibly. Natalie's smile vanished altogether. Daniel stepped forward slowly, not rushing, not apologizing for the interruption. He carried a slim leather portfolio under his arm. Nothing flashy, nothing dramatic, just something real. "I didn't come to cause a scene," he said calmly, "but I was asked to be present if questions came up." Natalie laughed, sharp and defensive. "Questions about what?" "This is a family matter." Daniel met her gaze without flinching. It became more than that when private information was presented publicly. I felt the shift then, not victory, not relief, but resistance. Natalie crossed her arms. My father leaned toward her, whispering urgently. My mother shook her head, eyes darting between Daniel and the rest of the family, already calculating damage. "Who are you?" someone asked from the table. Daniel turned slightly, acknowledging the question without centering himself. "I'm a records consultant. I specialize in verifying genetic test data and consent documentation." The word consent landed hard. Natalie scoffed. "This is ridiculous. Everyone knows how these tests work." "Actually," Daniel said evenly, "most people don't, especially when samples are submitted on someone else's behalf." The room went quiet again, but this time it wasn't expectant. It was unsettled. Natalie's voice sharpened. "Are you accusing me of something?" "No," Daniel replied. "I'm stating what I was asked to review." She turned to me, then eyes flashing. "You brought a stranger here." On my night, our night, I said. You made it that. Her mouth opened then closed. She looked to our parents waiting for backup. They didn't give it, not yet. Daniel opened the portfolio just enough for me to see the edge of documents inside. He didn't take them out. He didn't display anything. He didn't need to. I won't speak out of turn, he said. But I will say this. There are procedures that matter, permissions that matter, and timelines that matter. My father stood abruptly. This has gone far enough. Daniel nodded. That's usually what people say when things stop going according to plan. Natalie's face flushed. You're trying to humiliate me now, I shook my head. No, I'm making sure the truth doesn't stop where it's convenient. For the first time that night, I wasn't reacting. I was directing. Natalie looked around the room searching for support, but the energy had changed. People weren't leaning in anymore. They were leaning back, reassessing what they thought they were witnessing. Daniel closed the portfolio and held it at his side. We don't have to do this here, he said. But we do need to acknowledge that what's been presented isn't the whole picture. No one argued with that. Natalie sat down hard, crossing her legs tightly, jaw clenched. My mother stared at the table. My father looked older than ever. I stayed standing. The story hadn't flipped yet. I knew that. But it had cracked. And cracks, once visible, don't disappear. The first person to break the silence wasn't Natalie. It was my Fahar. This is unnecessary, he said, his voice louder than it needed to be. We're not doing this here. He stood, placing both hands flat on the table the way he always did when he wanted control back. For a moment it worked. A few people straightened. Someone nodded. Authority, when it's familiar, still has weight. Natalie seized it immediately. This is exactly what I was talking about, she said, turning toward the room. Deflection. When the truth gets uncomfortable, suddenly there are technicalities. She gestured sharply toward Daniel. This man doesn't know us. He doesn't know our family. He was brought here to intimidate us. That's not why I'm here, Daniel replied calmly. But that's what you're doing, Natalie snapped. Trying to confuse people. The word confuse hung there heavy with implication. She was reframing, fast casting herself as the one being attacked, the one under threat. My mother finally spoke. This doesn't change anything, she said quietly. The test says what it says. Daniel nodded once. It says something, but not everything. He opened his portfolio this time and removed a single document. Just one. He held it at chest height, not offering it to anyone yet. This is the consent record tied to the test you referenced, he said. Specifically, the authorization to submit samples and disclose results publicly. Natalie's confidence faltered. There's no authorization from her. Daniel continued, his tone unchanged, nodding slightly toward me. No signature, no electronic confirmation, nothing. A murmur rippled through the room. My father's face tightened. That's irrelevant. Families don't need permission. Daniel didn't argue. Laboratories do. Natalie laughed again, sharper this time. So what, you're saying the test is fake? No, Daniel said. I'm saying it was used outside the scope it was approved for. That distinction mattered, and the room could feel it even if not everyone understood it fully. Natalie turned on me, then her voice dropping. Is this really what you want? She asked. To humiliate us back, I felt the weight of that question. The risk embedded in it. This was the moment she was offering a retreat disguised as moral high ground. Before I could answer, someone else spoke. Wait, my aunt said from halfway down the table. My mother's older sister. Someone who rarely got involved in conflict. Her voice trembled, but she didn't sit back down. Is this why you asked me not to say anything? Every head turned. Natalie froze. What are you talking about? My aunt looked at my mother, then at my father. You told me this was private, that it would stay in the family. My mother's jaw tightened. Now isn't the time. But you said it was already settled, my aunt pressed. That everything had been handled properly. Daniel lowered the document slightly, watching, but not interrupting. Natalie's eyes darted between them. Handled how no one answered her right away. The room felt unbalanced now, like a structure that had lost a support beam. This wasn't a clean reveal. It was messier, more dangerous. My father cleared his throat. There's nothing more to discuss. Daniel closed the portfolio. That's rarely true when multiple people are holding different pieces of the same story. I felt it then, the shift from strategy to uncertainty. I had expected resistance, but not fracture. Not this many loose threads surfacing at once. Natalie looked shaken now, her earlier composure gone. She had planned a single narrative, a single reveal. She hadn't planned for questions that didn't point in the same direction. This isn't over, she said, forcing steadiness into her voice. She was right, but it was no longer under her control. The room didn't explode. It tilted. That was the difference. No shouting, no dramatic exits. Just a subtle shift, like a crowd stepping back at the same time. Conversations broke into fragments. People leaned away from the table instead of toward it. Phones that had been raised earlier were lowered, then raised again, this time, not to capture a spectacle, but to preserve a record. Natalie felt it before anyone said a word. She tried to regain momentum, straightening her posture, smoothing the front of her jacket. This has gone completely off the rails, she said, forcing a laugh that didn't land. We were here to celebrate. Now we're being interrogated. No one laughed with her. My aunt, the one who had spoken up, didn't sit down. She looked smaller than she had a moment ago, but steadier too. I just want to understand, she said. If this was all handled properly, why were we told to keep quiet? My mother opened her mouth, then closed it. My father stared at the table. That silence answered more than any explanation could have. Daniel didn't step in. He didn't need to. The questions were no longer coming from me. I think we should pause, said a family friend near the end of the table. This doesn't feel appropriate. Appropriate. The word carried weight in this room. It always had. Natalie bristled. So now everyone's taking her side? I realized then that she still believed this was a sides issue. Win or lose. Control or chaos. She hadn't noticed that the rules had changed. This isn't about sides, I said. I kept my voice even measured. It's about whether what was presented tonight stands on its own. People nodded, slowly, thoughtfully, not in agreement with me, agreement with the principle. Daniel finally spoke again, brief and contained. There are ways to verify timelines without turning this into a public spectacle. Natalie's jaw tightened. Meaning what? Meaning he said that what happens next doesn't have to happen here. That landed. The room exhaled as one. The tension shifted from confrontation to consequence. From now to later. And later I knew would be worse for some people than tonight ever could be. I watched Natalie recalibrate in real time. She glanced at our parents, then at the faces around her, searching for certainty. She didn't find it. Authority had slipped from her grasp, not dramatically, but decisively. Someone near the door whispered, "We should probably go." Another nodded. Chairs began to scrape back. The gathering was dissolving without anyone officially ending it. I stayed where I was. That was the adjustment. Not pushing forward, not pressing for answers in a room that had already delivered its verdict. Uncertainty, doubt, witness. Daniel leaned toward me slightly. "This is where patience matters," he said quietly. People talk when they're no longer being managed. I understood then what my mistake had been earlier in my life, trying to resolve things inside the system that benefited from my silence. Tonight wasn't about forcing truth out. It was about letting it surface where it couldn't be contained. Natalie gathered her things abruptly. "This isn't over," she said again, but the words sounded rehearsed now. "Hollow, no," I said. "It isn't." She left without looking back. Around us, the room continued to thin. Conversations turned hushed, purposeful. Names were exchanged. Phones buzzed with messages that wouldn't include me but would include what people had just seen. For the first time that night, I felt the pressure ease, not because the danger had passed, but because it had direction. I wasn't alone anymore. The room had turned. By Monday morning, the story wasn't my sister shared a DNA surprise. It was a woman was publicly exposed without her consent. That was the thing Natalie never understood. She thought the facts would carry her. She didn't realize any audience cares just as much about how something is done as what is being said. I didn't post. I didn't call relatives. I didn't go online to defend myself. I went to work. I kept my head down, did my job, came home, and let the weekend's noise roll outward without me feeding it. It felt strange, almost irresponsible, not to grab for control, but Daniel had been right. People talk when they're no longer being managed. And people talked. A cousin texted me first, not an apology exactly, more like a cautious check-in. Then an aunt sent a message that started with "I didn't know" and ended with "I'm sorry." Someone else asked if I was okay but didn't ask it in a way that required me to comfort them back. That mattered. Then the calls came to my parents' house. Not from me, from other people. The lab that processed the test sent a formal email to the account holder requesting clarification about consent and disclosure. Daniel didn't tell me every detail, only that it was standard procedure once complaints were made. And complaints had been made by someone who'd been in that room. Someone with a sense of propriety and a phone full of screenshots. Natalie tried to get ahead of it. She posted a vague message about family drama and boundaries, trying to paint herself as a victim of my overreaction. But the comments didn't go where she wanted them to go. People asked the same questions my aunt had asked at the table. Why was it public? Why was the person affected not consulted? Why did it feel staged? The videos didn't help her. Someone had recorded the moment Daniel introduced himself. Someone had recorded the word consent being said out loud in that room. And once that word was out there, it reframed everything. By midweek, Natalie's carefully curated image started to crack. Friends stopped tagging her. A local charity committee, one she'd been proud to be on, quietly removed her from an upcoming event. Not with a dramatic announcement, just an updated list and no name. That kind of consequence is the kind that lingers. My father emailed me on Thursday night. No greeting, no hope you're well. Just a paragraph that sounded like a press release. He said this had become a misunderstanding. He said we needed to handle this privately. He said I was damaging the family. I stared at the screen for a long time. And then I realized the truth underneath his words. He wasn't afraid of losing me. He was afraid of losing control of how people saw him. My mother left me a voicemail the next day. Her voice shifted mid-message from indignant to pleading. She said Natalie was going through a hard time. She asked me to help fix it. Fix it. Like it was my responsibility to clean up the mess made by people who had chosen spectacle over decency. I didn't call back. Not because I felt triumphant. I didn't. I felt raw. Like someone had peeled the protective layer off my life and exposed everything tender underneath. But the consequences kept moving anyway. By the end of the week, the story had turned fully. Not into my victory, into their accountability. Natalie had wanted me to break in front of a room full of witnesses. Instead, she had created witnesses for herself. And I was still standing in the middle of it, not relieved, not healed, just finally certain that what happened to me mattered. The letter arrived on a Wednesday. Not certified, not dramatic, just a standard envelope with the lab's return address printed neatly in the corner. I recognized it immediately. I stood at my kitchen counter for a long moment before opening it. The late afternoon light slanting across the floor dust visible in the air. The findings were clear. The test itself wasn't invalid, but its use had been. Submitted under assumptions that didn't hold up, shared in a way that violated policy. The language was careful, professional, unmistakable. The lab apologized to me directly. They also stated plainly that corrective action had been taken internally and that the account associated with the submission had been flagged. No courtroom, no headlines, just accountability. Natalie didn't call after that. Neither did my parents. Not right away. Silence stretched, then settled. It felt different now, not like tension, but like something finally set down. 2 weeks later, my aunt came by with a pie I didn't ask for, and a look that said she wasn't sure she was welcome. We sat at my table, the same one where I'd opened the letter. She told me the family had stopped pretending nothing happened, that people were asking questions that couldn't be smoothed over, that Natalie had stepped back from a lot of things she used to run. She didn't lose everything, my aunt said carefully, but she lost the benefit of the doubt. That felt right, proportionate, real. After my aunt left, I sat alone with a cup of coffee gone cold and thought about what I'd expected justice to feel like. I'd imagined relief, vindication, maybe even satisfaction. Instead, it felt like space, room to breathe, to think without bracing myself, to stop rehearsing explanations I no longer owed anyone. Daniel checked in once more just to make sure I was all right. He didn't offer advice or next steps. He didn't need to. His work was done. So was mine. I didn't reconcile with my parents. Not because I was angry, though I had every right to be, but because something more honest had taken its place. Clarity. I understood now who they were when no one was watching, what they were willing to trade for appearances. I kept my distance. That was the boundary. What I kept more importantly was myself. The quiet mornings, the friendships that didn't require me to shrink, the knowledge that dignity isn't something you defend in the moment, it's something you choose again afterward. My birthday came and went the following year without a party. I spent it with people who asked me what I wanted and meant it when they listened. That was enough. What happened to me didn't disappear. It became part of my story. But it no longer defined it. I wasn't humiliated. I was revealed to myself first. And that turned out to be the part worth keeping. If this story brought up something familiar for you about family fairness or the cost of staying quiet, I'd like to hear your thoughts. Feel free to share your perspective in the comments. And if you want to follow more stories about accountability, truth, and rebuilding after betrayal, you're welcome to stay for the next one.